I drank some more. So did she. Maybe I'm becoming less of one, I said. Anything is possible, she smiled. She was still exotic to me, that was obvious, but it was a pleasant exoticism now. Beyond pleasant, in fact. Actually, anything is possible, I told her, but didn't go into the maths. She put her arm around me. I did not know the etiquette. Was this the moment I was meant to recite poetry, written by dead people? Or was I meant to massage her anatomy? I did nothing, I just let her stroke my back as I stared upwards, beyond the thermosphere, and watched the two moons slide together, and become one, the watcher. The next day I had a hangover. I realized that if getting drunk was how people forgot they were mortal, then hangovers were how they remembered. I woke with a headache, a dry mouth, and a bad stomach. I left Isabel in bed and went downstairs for a glass of water. Then I had a shower. I got dressed and went into the living room to read poetry. I had the strange but real sense that I was being watched. The sense grew and grew. I stood up, went to the window. Outside the street was empty, the large, static red brick houses just stood there, like decharged crafts on a landing strip, but still I stayed looking. I thought I could see something reflected, in one of the windows, a shape beside a car, a human shape maybe. My eyes might have been playing tricks, I was hungover after all. Newton pressed his nose into my knee, he released a curious, high-pitched whine. I don't know, I said. I stared out of the glass again, away from reflections, to direct reality, and then I saw it, dark, hovering just above that same parked car. I realized what it was the top of a human head. I'd been right, someone was hiding from my stare. Wait there. I told Newton, guard the house. I ran outside across the drive and onto the street, just in time to see someone sprinting away, around the next corner, a man wearing jeans and a black top. Even from behind, and at a distance, the man struck me as familiar, but I couldn't think where I had seen him. I turned the corner, but there was no one there. It was just another empty suburban street, and a long one. I was too long for the person to have run down. Well, it wasn't quite empty. There was an old human female walking towards me, dragging a shopping trolley. I stopped running. Hello, she said, smiling. Her skin was creased with age, in the way typical of the species. The best way to think of the aging process, in relation to a human face, is to imagine a map of an area of innocent land, which slowly becomes a city with many long and winding routes. I think she knew me. Hello, I said back. How are you now? I was looking around, trying to assess the possible escape routes. If they'd slid down one of the passageways, then they could have been anywhere. There were about 200 obvious possibilities. I'm fine, I said. Fine. My eyes darted around, but were unrewarded. Who was this man? I wondered. And where was he from? Occasionally in the days that followed, I would have that feeling again of being watched. But I never caught a glimpse of my watcher. Which was strange, and led me to only two possibilities. Either I was becoming too dull-witted and human, or the person I was looking for, the one who I could sometimes feel watching me, in university corridors and in supermarkets, was too sharp-witted to be caught. In other words, something not human. I tried to convince myself that this was ridiculous. I was almost able to convince myself that my own mind was ridiculous, and that I'd never actually been anything other than human, that I really was Professor Andrew Martin, and that every other thing had been a kind of dream. Yes, I could almost do that. Almost. How to see forever, that it will never come again, is what makes life so sweet. Emily Dickinson. Isabel was at her laptop in the living room. An American friend of hers wrote a blog about ancient history, and Isabel was contributing a comment about an article on Mesopotamia. I watched her, mesmerized. The Earth's moon was a dead place with no atmosphere. It had no way of healing its scars, not like Earth or its inhabitants. I was amazed the way time mended things so quickly on this planet. I looked at Isabel and I saw a miracle. It was ridiculous, I know, but a human in its own small way, was a kind of miraculous achievement in mathematical terms. For a start, it wasn't very likely that Isabel's mother and father would have met. And even if they had met, the chances of their having a baby would have been pretty slim, given the numerous agonies surrounding the human dating process. Her mother would have had about 100,000 eggs, ovulating inside her, and her father would have had 5 trillion sperm during that same length of time, but even then, even that 1 in 500 million chance of existing was a terrible understatement, and nowhere near did the coincidence of a human life justice. You see, when you looked at a human's face, you had to comprehend the luck that brought that person there. Isabel Martin had a total of 150,000 generations before her, and that only includes the humans. That was 150,000 increasingly unlikely populations, resulting in increasingly unlikely children. That was a 1 in quadrillion chance, multiplied by another quadrillion for every generation, or around 20,000 times more than the number of the atoms in the universe. But even that was only the start of it, because humans had only been around for 3 million Earth years, certainly a very short time compared to the 3.5 billion years since life first appeared on this planet. Therefore, mathematically rounding things up, there was no chance at all that Isabel Martin could have existed, a 0 in 10 to the power of forever chance. And yet there she was in front of me, and I was quite taken aback by it all. I really was. Suddenly, it made me realize why religion was such a big thing around here, because, yes, sure, God could not exist, but then neither could humans. So if they believed in themselves, the logic must go, why not believe in something that was only a fraction more unlikely? I don't know how long I looked at her like this. What's going through your mind? She asked me, closing the laptop. This is an important detail, remember. She closed the laptop. Oh, just things, tell me. Well, I'm thinking about how life is so miraculous, none of it really deserves the title, reality. Andrew, I'm a little taken aback about how your whole worldview has become so romantic. It was ridiculous that I'd ever failed to see it. She was beautiful, a 41-year-old poised delicately between the young woman she had been and the older one she would become, this intelligent, wound-dabbing historian, this person who would buy someone else's shopping with no other motive than simply to help. I knew other things now. And you should be a screaming baby, a child learning to walk, a girl at school eager to learn, a teenager listening to talking heads, in her bedroom while reading books by A.J.P. Taylor, and you should be a university student studying the past, and trying to interpret its patterns. She'd been, simultaneously, a young woman in love, full of 1,000 hopes, trying to read the future as well as the past. She then taught British and European history, the big pattern she had discovered, being the one that revealed the civilizations that advanced with the Enlightenment, did so through violence and territorial conquest, more than through scientific progress, political modernization and philosophical understanding. She had then tried to uncover the woman's place in this history, and it had been difficult because history had always been written by the victors of wars, and the victors of the gender. Wars had always been male, and so women had been placed in the margins, and in the footnotes, if they'd been lucky. And yet the irony was that she soon placed herself in the margins, voluntarily, giving up work for family, because she imagined that when she eventually arrived at her deathbed, she would feel more regret about unborn children than unwritten books. But as soon as she made that move, she'd felt her husband begin to take her for granted. She had stuff to give, but it was ungiven, it was locked away, and I felt an incredible excitement at being able to witness the love re-emerge inside her. Because it was a total prime of life love, the kind that could only be possible in someone who was going to die at some point in the future, and also someone who had lived enough to know that loving and being loved back was a hard thing to get right, but when you managed it, you could see forever. Two mirrors, opposite and facing each other at perfectly parallel angles, viewing themselves through the other, the view as deep as infinity. Yes, that was what love was for. I may not have understood marriage, but I understood love, I was sure of it. Love was a way to live forever in a single moment, and it was also a way to see yourself, as you had never actually seen yourself, and made you realize, having done so, that this view was a more meaningful one than Any of your previous self-perceptions and self-deceptions. Even though the big joke was, indeed, the very biggest joke in the universe was, that Isabel Martin believed I had always been a human called Andrew Martin, who had been born 100 miles away in Sheffield, and not, in fact, 8,653,178,431 light-years away. Isabel, I think I should tell you something. It is something very important. She looked worried. What? What is it? There was an imperfection in her lower lip, the left side of it slightly fuller than the right. It was a fascinating detail on a face that only had fascinating details. How could I have ever found her hideous? How? How? I couldn't do it. Say it. I should have, but I didn't. I think we should buy a new sofa. I said, that's the important thing you want to tell me. Yes, I don't like it. I don't like purple. Don't you? No, it's too close to violet. All those short wavelength colors mess with my brain. You are funny. Short wavelength colors, well, that's what they are, but purple is the color of emperors, and you've always acted like an emperor, so, is it? Why? Byzantine empresses gave birth in the purple chamber. Their babies were given the honorary title porphyrogenitas, which meant, born to the purple, to separate them from riffraff generals who won the throne through going to war. But then in Japan, purple is the color of death. I was mesmerized by her voice when she spoke about historical things. It had a delicacy to it, each sentence, a long, thin arm carrying the past as if it were porcelain, something that could be brought out and presented in front of you, but which could break and become a million pieces at any moment. I realized even her being a historian was part of her caring nature. Well, I just think we could do with some new furniture, I said. Do you now? She asked, staring deep into my eyes in a mock, serious way. One of the brighter humans, a German-born theoretical physicist called Albert Einstein, explained relativity to dimmer members of his species by telling them, put your hand on a hot stove for a minute, and it seems like an hour. Sit with a pretty girl for an hour, and it seems like a minute. And what if looking at the pretty girl felt like putting your hand on a hot stove? What was that? Quantum mechanics. After a period of time she went towards me and kissed me. I had kissed her before, but now the lightning effect on my stomach was very like fear. Indeed, it was every symptom of fear, but a pleasurable fear, an enjoyable danger. She smiled and told me a story she had once read, not in a history book, but in a terrible magazine at the doctor's. A husband and a wife who'd fallen out of love had their own separate affairs on the internet. It was only when they came to meet their illicit lovers that they realized they'd actually been having an affair with each other. But far from tearing the marriage apart, it restored it, and they lived more happily than before. I have something to tell you, I said, after this story. What? I love you. I love you, too. Yes, but it is impossible to love you. Thank you. Precisely what a girl likes to hear. No, I mean, because of where I come from, no one there can love. What, Sheffield? It's not that bad. No, listen, this is new to me. I'm scared. She held my head in her hands as if it were another delicate thing she wanted to preserve. She was a human. I knew one day her husband would die, and yet she still dared to love him. That was an amazing thing. We kissed some more. Kissing was very much like eating, but instead of reducing the appetite, the food consumed actually increased it. The food wasn't matter, it had no mass. And yet it seemed to convert into a very delicious energy inside me. Let's go upstairs, she said. She said the word suggestively, as though upstairs wasn't just a place, but an alternate reality made from a different texture of spacetime, a pleasure land we would enter via a wormhole on the 6th stair. Of course, she was absolutely right. Afterwards, we lay there for a few minutes, and then she decided we needed some music. Anything, I said, but the planets. That's the only piece of music you like. Not anymore. So she put on something called Love Theme by Ennio Morricone. It was sad, but beautiful. Can you remember when we saw Cinema Paradiso? Yes, I lied. You hated it. You said it was so sentimental you wanted to throw up. You said it cheapens emotion to have it exaggerated and fetishized like that. Not that you've ever wanted to watch emotional things. I think, if I dare say it, you've always been scared of emotion. And so saying that you don't like sentimentality is a way of saying you don't like feeling emotion. Well, I said, don't worry, that me is dead. She smiled. She didn't seem worried at all, but of course, she should have been, we all should have been, and just how worried we should have been would become clear to me only a few hours later. The intruder, she woke me in the middle of the night. I think I heard someone, she said. Her voice indicated a tightness of the vocal folds within her larynx. It was fear disguised as calm. What do you mean? I swear to God, Andrew, I think there's someone in the house. You might have heard Gulliver. No, Gulliver hasn't come downstairs. I'd been awake. I waited in the near darkness, and then I heard something. Footsteps. It very much sounded like someone was walking around our living room. The clock's digital display beamed 4:22. I pulled back the duvet and got out of bed. I looked at Isabel. Just stay there. Whatever happens, stay right there. Be careful, Isabel said. She switched on her bedside light and looked for the phone that was usually in its cradle, on the table, but it wasn't there. That's weird. I left the room and waited a moment on the landing. There was silence now. The silence that can only exist in houses at 4:20 in the morning. It struck me then just how primitive life was here, with houses that could not do anything to protect themselves. In short, I was terrified. Slowly and quietly, I tiptoed downstairs. A normal person would probably have switched the hallway light on, but I didn't. This wasn't for my benefit, but for Isabel's. If she came down and saw whoever it was and they saw her, well, that could have been a very dangerous situation. Also, it would have been unwise to alert the intruder of my presence downstairs, if they hadn't already been alerted. And so it was that I crept into the kitchen and saw Newton sleeping soundly, maybe even, suspiciously so, in his basket. As far as I could tell, no one else had been in here or the utility room, and so I left, too. Check the sitting room. No one was there, or no one that I could see anyway. They were just books, the sofa, an empty fruit bowl, a desk, and a radio. So then I went along the hallway to the living room. This time, before I opened the door, I sensed strongly that someone was there. But without the gifts, I had no idea if my senses were fooling me. I opened the door. As I did so, I felt a deep fear lightening my whole body. Prior to taking human form, I had never experienced such a feeling. What had we Von Dorians ever had to be scared of in a world without death or loss, or uncontrollable pain? Again, I saw only furniture. The sofa, the chairs, the switched-off television, the coffee table. No one was there, not at that moment, but we had definitely been visited. I knew this because Isabel's laptop was on the coffee table. This alone wasn't worrying, as she had left it there last night. What worried me though was that it was open. She'd closed it, but not only that, the light emission, even though the computer was facing away from me, I could see that the screen was glowing, which meant someone had been using it within the last 2 minutes. I quickly went around the coffee table to see what was on the screen, but nothing had been deleted. I closed the laptop and went upstairs. What was it? Isabel asked as I slid back into bed. Oh, it was nothing. We must have been hearing things. And Isabel fell asleep as I stared up at the ceiling, wishing I had a God who could hear my prayers. I thought it was time. The next morning, Gulliver brought his guitar downstairs and played a bit for us. He had learned an old piece of music by a band known as Nirvana, called All Apologies. With intense concentration on his face, he kept perfect time. He was very good, and we applauded him afterwards. For a moment, I forgot every worry. A king of infinite space. It turned out that Hamlet was quite a depressing thing to watch, when you had just given up immortality and were worried that someone was watching you. The best bit came halfway through when he looked up at the sky. Do you see yonder cloud that's almost in the shape of a camel? He asked. By the mass, said another man, a curtain fetishist called Polonius, and 'tis like a camel, indeed. He thinks it is like a weasel, said Hamlet. It is backed like a weasel, then. Hamlet squinted and scratched his head, or like a whale, and Polonius, who wasn't really in tune with Hamlet's surreal sense of humor, very, like a whale. Afterwards we went out to a restaurant. It was called Tito's. I had a bread salad called panzanella. It had anchovies in it, these were a fish, so I spent the first 5 minutes carefully taking them out and laying them on the side of the plate, offering them silent words of grief. "You seem to enjoy the play," said Isabel. I thought I would lie. "I did, yes. Did you?" "No, it was awful. I think it was fundamentally wrong to have the Prince of Denmark played by a TV gardener." "Yes," said, "you're right. It was really bad." She laughed. "You seem more relaxed than I'd ever seen her, less worried about me and Gulliver." "There's a lot of death in it as well," I said. "Yes. Are you scared of death?" She looked awkward. "Of course. I'm scared to death of death. I'm a lapsed Catholic. Death and guilt, that's all I have." Catholicism, I discovered, was a type of Christianity for humans who like gold leaf, Latin and guilt. Well, I think you do amazingly. Considering that your body is starting a slow process of physical deterioration leading ultimately to, okay, thank you, enough, death. But I thought you liked thinking about death. I thought that's why we saw Hamlet. I like my death on a stage, not over my Panera Biata. So we talked and drank red wine as people came and left the restaurant. She told me of the module she was being cajoled into teaching next year. Early civilized life in the Aegean, they keep trying to push me further and further back in time. I think they're trying to tell me something. Next it will be early civilized Diplodocuses. She laughed, so I laughed too. You should get that novel published, I said, trying a different tack. Why do them the sky? It's good, what I've read of it. I don't know. That one was a bit private, very personal, of its time. I was in a dark place. That was when you were, well, you know, we're over that now. I feel like a different person now, almost like I'm married to a different person too. Well, you should write fiction again. Oh, I don't know. It's getting the ideas. I didn't want to tell her that I had quite a lot of ideas I could give her. We haven't done this for years, Every, she said. Done what? Talk. Like this. It feels like a first date or something, in a good way. It feels like I'm getting to know you. Yes, God, she said wistfully. She was drunk now. So was I, even though I was still on my first glass. Our first date, she went on. Can you remember? Of course, it was here, but it was an Indian then. What was its name? Taj Mahal. You changed your mind on the phone after I wasn't too impressed at the Pizza Hut suggestion. Cambridge didn't even have a Pizza Express back then. God, 20 years. Can you believe it? Talk about the compression of time through memory. I remember it better than anything. I was late. You waited an hour for me. Out in the rain. I thought I was so romantic. She looked off into the distance as though 20 years ago were a physical thing that could be seen sitting at a table in the corner of the room, and as I stared at those eyes, which were loitering somewhere in the infinity between past and present, happy and sad, I deeply wanted to have been that person she was talking about. The one who had braved the rain and got soaked to the skin 2 decades ago. But I wasn't that person, and I would never be him. I felt like Hamlet. I had absolutely no idea what to do. He must have loved you, I said. She stopped daydreaming, was suddenly alert. What? I said, staring down at my slow-melting limoncello ice cream. And I still love you. As much as I did then. I was just, seeing as the past in the third person, distance of time. She held my hand across the table. Squeezed it. For a second I could dream I was Professor Andrew Martin, just as easily as a TV gardener could dream he was Hamlet. Can you remember when we used to go punting on the Cam? She asked. That time you fell in the water. God, we were drunk. Can you remember? Well, we were still here before you had that Princeton offer and we went to America. We really had fun, didn't we? I nodded, but I felt uncomfortable. Also, I didn't want to leave Gulliver on his own any longer. I asked for the bill. Listen, I said as we walked out of the restaurant. There's something I really feel obliged to let you know. What? She asked, looking up at me, holding onto my arm as she flinched at the wind. What is it? I breathed deeply, filling my lungs, seeking courage somewhere in the nitrogen and the oxygen. In my mind, I ran through the pieces of information I had to give her. I am not from here. In fact, I am not even your husband. I am from another planet, in another solar system, in a distant galaxy. The thing is, think we should probably cross the road, said Isabel, tugging my arm, as two silhouettes, a shouting female and a male, came towards us on the pavement, so we did. Crossing at an angle that tried to balance the concealment of fear with rapid avoidance, that angle being, as it was everywhere in the universe, 48 degrees away from the straight line on which we had been traveling. I was traveling. Midway across that carless road I turned and saw her, Zoe, the woman from the hospital I had met on my first day on this planet. She was still shouting at the large, muscular, shaven-headed man. The man had a tattoo of a tear on his face. I remembered her confession of her love of violent men. I am telling you, you have got it wrong. You're the one that's crazy, not me. But if you want to go around like a primitive life form, that's fine. Do it, you thick piece of shit, you pretentious, cock-munching slag. And then she saw me, the art of letting go. It's you, Zoe said. You know her, whispered Isabel. I'm afraid, yes, from the hospital. Oh, no, please. I said to the man, be nice. The man was staring at me. His shaven head, along with the rest of his body, came towards me. And what on earth was it got to do with you? On earth, I said. It's nice to see people getting on together. You fucking what? Just turn around, Isabel said fearlessly, and leave everyone alone. Seriously, if you do anything else, you'll just regret it in the morning. It was then he turned to Isabel and held her face, squeezing her cheeks hard, distorting her beauty. Anger flared inside me as he said to her, shut your fucking mouth, you're meddling bitch. Isabel now had fear, swollen eyes. There were rational things to do here, I was sure, but I'd come a long way since rationality. Give us all alone, I said, momentarily forgetting that my words were just that, words. He looked at me and he laughed, and with that laughter came the terrifying knowledge that I had no power whatsoever. The gifts had been taken from me. I was, to all intents and purposes, no more equipped for a fight with a giant, gym-bodied thug than the average human professor of mathematics, which wasn't particularly well equipped, at all. He beat me, and it was a proper beating. Not the kind Gulliver had given me, and which I had opted to feel. No, if there had been an option not to feel the cheap metal rings of this man's fist collide into my face with comet-like force, then I would have taken that option, as I would have done only moments later when I was on the ground receiving a kick in the stomach, rapidly unsettling the undigested Italian food residing there, followed by the final piece of brittlest punctuation, the kick to the head, more of a stamp. Actually, after that, there was nothing. There was darkness and Hamlet. This was your husband. Look you now what follows. I heard Isabel wailing. I tried to speak to her, but words were hard to reach. The count of a presentment of two brothers. I could hear the rise and fall of a siren, and knew it was for me. Here is your husband, like a mildewed ear. I woke in the ambulance, and there was only her face above me, like a sun that eyes could stand, and she stroked my hand as she had once stroked my hand the first time I'd met her. I love you, she said, and I knew the point of love right then. The point of love was to help you survive. The point was also to forget meaning, to stop looking and start living. The meaning was to hold the hand of someone you cared about and to live inside the present. Past and future were myths. The past was just the present that had died, and the future would never exist anyway, because, by the time we got to it, the future would have turned into the present. The present was all there. Was the ever-moving, ever-changing present, and the present was fickle. It could only be caught by letting go, so I let go. I let go of everything in the universe, everything except her hand. Neuroadaptive activity. I woke up in the hospital. It was the first time in my life I had woken in serious physical pain. It was night time, Isabel had stayed for a while and had fallen asleep in a plastic chair, but she had now been told to go home, so I was alone, with my pain, feeling how truly helpless it was to be a human, and I stayed awake in the dark, urging the earth to rotate faster and faster so that it could be facing the sun again, for the tragedy of night to become the comedy of day. I wasn't used to night, of course I had experienced it on other planets, but Earth had the darkest nights I had ever experienced, not the longest, but the deepest, the loneliest, the most tragically beautiful. I consoled myself with random prime numbers: 73, 131, 977, 1213, 83,719, each as indivisible as love except by one and itself. I struggled to think of higher primes, even my mathematical skills and abandoned me. I realized they tested my ribs, my eyes, my ears, and inside my mouth. They tested my brain and my heart. My heart had caused no concern, though they did consider 49 beats per minute to be a little on the slow side. As for my brain, they were a little concerned about my medial temporal lobe, as there seemed to be some unusual neuroadaptive activity taking place. It's as though there has been something taken out of your brain and your cells are trying to overcompensate. But clearly nothing has been taken out or damaged, but it is very strange. I nodded. Of course something had been taken out, but I also knew it was nothing any human, Earth-based, doctor would ever be able to understand. It had been a difficult test, but I had passed it. I was as good as human. And they gave me some paracetamol and coating for the pain which still pulsated inside my head and on my face. Eventually I went home. The next day Ari came to visit me. I was in bed, Isabel was at work, and Gulliver was, quite genuinely it seemed, at school. Man, you look fucking terrible. I smiled, lifted the bag of frozen peas from the side of my head, which is a coincidence, because I feel fucking terrible, too. You should have gone to the police. Well, yes, I was thinking about it. Isabel thinks I should, but I have a little bit of a phobia about police, ever since I was arrested for not wearing clothes. Yeah, well, you can't have psychos roaming around pulverizing anyone they feel like. No, I know. Listen, mate, I just want to say that was big of you. That was old school gentleman defending your wife like that, and, cute us for it. It surprised me. I'm not putting you down or anything, but I didn't know you were that kind of shining armor guy. Well, I've changed. I have a lot of activity in my medial temporal lobe. I think it's probably to do with that. Ari looked doubtful. Well, whatever it is, you're becoming a man of honor, and that's rare for mathematicians. It's always been us physicists who've had the big cojones, traditionally. Don't screw it up with Isabel, you know what I mean. I looked at Ari for a long time. He was a good man. I could see that. I could trust him. Listen, Ari, you know that thing I was going to tell you at the cafe at the college when you had that migraine? Yes, I hesitated. I was disconnected, so I knew I could tell him, or thought I could. I am from another planet, in another solar system, in another galaxy. Ari laughed. It was a loud, deep blast of laughter, without a single note of doubt. Okay, so you'll be wanting to phone home now. If we've got a connection that reaches the Andromeda Galaxy, it's not the Andromeda Galaxy, it's further away, many, many light years. This sentence was hardly heard as Ari was laughing so much. He stared at me with fake blankness. So how did you get here? Spaceship? Wormhole? No, I didn't travel in any conventional way you would understand. It was antimatter technology. Home is forever away, but it is also only a second away. So now, I can never go back. It was no good. Ari, a man who believed in the possibility of alien life, still could not accept the idea when it was standing or lying right in front of him. You see, I had special talents as a result of technology. The gifts. Go on then, Ari said, controlling his laughter. Shut me. I can't. I have no powers now. I'm exactly like a human. Ari found this bit especially funny. He was annoying me now. He was still a good man, but good men could be annoying, I realized. exactly like a human. Whoa man, you're fucked then, aren't you? I nodded, yes, I think I might be. Ari smiled, looked concerned. Listen, make sure you keep taking all the tablets, not just the painkillers, all of them. Yeah, I nodded. He thought I was mad. Maybe it'd be easier. Maybe it would be easier if I could take on this view myself. The delusion that it was a delusion. If one day I could wake up and believe it was all a dream. Listen, I said, I've researched you. I know you understand quantum physics and I know you've written about simulation theory. You say there's a 30% chance that none of this is real. You told me in the cafe you believed in aliens, so I know you can believe this. Ari shook his head, but at least he wasn't laughing now. Now, you're wrong. I can't, that's okay, I said, realizing that if Ari wouldn't believe me, Isabel never would, but Gulliver, there was always Gulliver. One day I would tell him the truth, but what then? Could he accept me as a father knowing I had lied? I was trapped. I had to lie and to stay lying. But Ari, I said, if ever I need a favor, if ever I need Gulliver and Isabel to stay at your house, would that be okay? He smiled. Sure, mate, sure. Platic Kurdic distribution. The next day, still swollen with bruises, I was back at the college. There was something about being in the house, even with Newton for company, that troubled me. It never had before, but now it made me feel incredibly lonely. So I went to work, and I realized why work was so important on Earth. It stopped you feeling lonely, but loneliness was there for me waiting in my office, which was where I had returned after my lecture on distribution models, but my head hurt. And I must admit I did quite welcome the peace. After a while there was a knock on the door. I ignored it. This minus a headache was my preferred option, but then it happened again. And it happened in such a way that I knew it was going to keep on happening, and so I stood up and went to the door, and after a while I opened it. A young woman was there. It was Maggie, the wild flower in bloom, the one with the curly, red hair and the full lips. She was twirling her hair and her finger again. She was breathing deeply and seemed to be inhaling a different kind of air, one which contained a mysterious, aphrodisiac, promising euphoria. And she was smiling, so, she said. I waited a minute for the rest of the sentence, but it didn't happen, so was beginning, middle and end. It meant something, but I didn't know what. What do you want? Asked. She smiled again. Bit her lip, to discuss the compatibility of bell curves and Platy-Kurdic distribution models, Platic-Kurdic. She added, running her finger down my shirt towards my trousers. From the Greek, platus meaning flat, kurtus meaning bulgy. Oh, her finger danced away from me. So, Jake LaMotta, let's go. My name is not Jake LaMotta. I know, I was referencing your face. Oh. So, are we going? Where? Hat and Feathers. I had no idea what she was talking about. Oh, indeed, who she actually was to me or to the man who had been Professor Andrew Martin. All right, I said, let's go. That was it, right there. My first mistake of the day, but by no means the last, the Hat and Feathers. I soon discovered the Hat and Feathers was a misleading name. In it there was no hat and absolutely no feathers. They were just heavily inebriated people with red faces laughing at their own jokes. This, I soon discovered, was a typical pub. The pub was an invention of humans living in England, designed as compensation for the fact that they were humans living in England. I rather liked the place. Let's find a quiet corner, she said to me, this young Maggie. There were lots of corners, as there always seemed to be in human-made environments. Earth-dwellers still seem to be a long way off from understanding the link between straight lines and acute forms of psychosis, which might explain why pubs seem to be full of aggressive people. There were straight lines running into each other all over the place, every table, every chair at the bar, at the fruit machine. I inquired about these machines. Apparently they were aimed at men whose fascination with flashing squares of light was coupled with a poor grasp of probability theory. with so many corners to choose from. It was a surprise to see us sit near a straight, continuous piece of wall at an oval table and on circular stalls. "This is perfect," she said. "Is it?" "Yes." "Right. What would you like?" "Liquid nitrogen," I replied thoughtlessly. "Are we skin soda?" "Yes, one of them," and we drank and chatted like old friends, which I think we were, though her conversational approach seemed quite different from Isabel's. "Your penis is everywhere," she said at one point. I looked around. "Is it 220,000 hits on YouTube, right?" I said. They'd blurred it out though. Quite a wise move, I would say, from first-hand experience. She laughed even more at this. It was a laugh that did nothing to relieve the pain pressing into and out of my face. I changed the mood. I asked her what it meant for her to be a human. I wanted to ask the whole world this question, but right now she would do, and so she told me. "The ideal castle," she said. "Being human is being a young child on Christmas Day who receives an absolutely magnificent castle, and there is a perfect photograph of this castle on the box, and you want more than anything to play with the castle and the knights and the princesses. Because it looks like such a perfectly human world, but the only problem is that the castle isn't built, it's in tiny intricate pieces. And although there's a book of instructions, you don't understand it, and nor can your parents, or Aunt Sylvie. So you were just left, crying at the ideal castle on the box, which no one would ever be able to build, somewhere else." I thanked Maggie for this interpretation, and then I explained to her that I thought the meaning was coming to me the more I forgot it. After that I spoke a lot about Isabel. This seemed to irritate her, and she switched the subject. "After this," she said, circling the top of her glass with her finger. "Are we going somewhere else?" I recognized the tone of this somewhere else. It had the exact same frequency as Isabel's use of the word upstairs the Saturday before. "Are we going to have sex?" She laughed some more. Laughter, I realized, was the reverberating sound of a truth hitting a lie. Humans existed inside their own delusions, and laughing was a way out. The only possible bridge they had between each other. That and love, but there was no love between me and Maggie. I want you to know that. Anyway, it turned out we were going to have sex, so we left and walked along a few streets until we reached Willow Road and her flat. Her flat, by the way, was the messiest thing I had ever seen that hadn't been a direct result of nuclear fission. A supercluster of books, clothes, empty wine bottles, stubbed out cigarettes, old toast and unopened envelopes. I discovered that her full name was Margaret. Lowell. I wasn't an expert on Earth names, but I still knew this was wildly inappropriate. She should have been called Lana Bell Curve or Ashley Brainsex or something. Anyway, apparently I never called her Margaret. No one except my broadband provider calls me that. She was Maggie, and Maggie, it transpired, was an unconventional human. For instance, when asked about her religion, she answered Pythagorean. She was well-traveled, the most ridiculous expression, if you belonged to a species that had only left its own planet to visit its moon. And Maggie, it transpired, hadn't even been there. In this case, it merely meant she had taught English in Spain, Tanzania, and various parts of South America for 4 years before returning to study maths. She also seemed to have a very limited sense of body shame by human standards, and had worked as a lap dancer to pay for her undergraduate studies. She wanted to have sex on the floor, which was an intensely uncomfortable way of having it. As we unclothed each other, we kissed. This wasn't the kind of kissing that brought you closer, the kind that Isabel was good at. This was self-referential kissing, kissing about kissing, dramatic and fast and pseudo-intense. It also hurt. My face was still tender and Maggie's meta-kisses didn't really seem to accommodate the possibility of pain, and then we were naked, or rather the parts of us which needed to be naked were naked, and it started to feel more like a strange kind of fighting than anything else. I looked at her face and her neck and her breasts, and was reminded of the fundamental strangeness of the human body. With Isabel, I had never felt like I was sleeping with an alien, but with Maggie, the level of Exoticism bordered on terror. There was physiological pleasure, quite a good deal of it at times, but it was a very localized anatomical kind of pleasure. I smelt her skin, and I liked the smell of it. A mixture of coconut-scented lotion and bacteria, but my mind felt terrible for a reason that involved more than my head pain. Almost immediately after we had started having sex, I had a queasy sensation in my stomach as though the altitude had drastically changed. I stopped. I got away from her. "What's the matter?" she asked me. "I don't know, but something is. This feels wrong. I realize I don't want to have an orgasm right now. Bit late for a crisis of conscience." I really didn't know what the matter was. After all, it was just sex. I got dressed and discovered there were 4 missed calls on my mobile phone. "Goodbye, Maggie." She laughed some more. "Kid, my love to your wife." I had no idea what was so funny, but I decided to be polite and laughed too as I stepped outside into cool evening air, which was tainted with maybe a little more carbon dioxide than I had noticed. I had no idea what was wrong with this. I was a little confused before. Places beyond logic. "You're home late," Isabel said. "I've been worried. I thought that man might have come after you." "What man?" "That brew to smash your face in." She was in the living room at home. Its walls lined with books about history and mathematics, mainly mathematics. Then she softened a bit. "How was your day?" "Oh," I said, putting down my bag. "It was okay. I did some teaching. I met some students. I had sex with that person, my student, the one called Maggie." It's funny, I had a sensation these words were taking me somewhere into a dangerous valley, but still I said them. Isabel meanwhile took a little time to process this information even by human standards. The queasy feeling in my stomach hadn't gone away. If anything, it had intensified. "That's not very funny." I wasn't trying to be funny. She studied me for a long while. Then dropped a fountain pen on the floor. The lid came off. "Ink sprayed." "What are you talking about?" I told her again. The bit she seemed most interested in was the last part about me having sex with Maggie. Indeed, she was so interested that she started to hyperventilate and throw the pen pot in the direction of my head, and then she began to cry. "Why are you crying?" I said. But I was beginning to understand. I moved closer to her. It was then she launched an attack on me, her hands moving as fast as laws of anatomical motion allow. Her fingernail scratched my face, adding fresh wounds. Then she just stood there, looking at me, as if she had wounds too. Invisible ones. "I'm sorry, Isabel. You have to understand. I didn't realize I was doing anything wrong. This is all new. You don't know how alien all this is to me. I know it is morally wrong to love another woman, but I don't love her. It was just pleasure. The way a peanut butter sandwich is pleasure. You don't realize the complexity and hypocrisy of this system." She had stopped. Her breathing slowed and deepened. And her first question became her only one. "Who is she?" And then, "Who is she?" And soon after, "Who is she?" She. I was reluctant to speak. Speaking to a human you cared about, I realized, was so fraught with hidden danger that it was a wonder people bothered speaking at all. I could have lied. I could have backtracked. But I realized lying, though essential to keep someone in love with you, actually wasn't what my love demanded. It demanded truth, so I said, in the simplest words I could find, "I don't know. But I don't love her. I love you." I didn't realize that it was such a big thing. I sort of knew as it was happening. My stomach told me, in a way it never tells me with peanut butter. And then I stopped. The only time I'd come across the concept of infidelity was in Cosmopolitan magazine. And they really hadn't done enough to explain it properly. They'd sort of said it depends on the context, and you see, it was such an alien concept for me to understand. It was like trying to get a human to understand transcellular healing. "I'm sorry." She wasn't listening. She had her own things to say. I don't even know you. I have no idea of who you are. No idea. If you've done this, you really are an alien to me, am I? Listen, Isabel, you're right. I am. I am not from here. I have never loved before. All this is new. I'm an amateur at this. Listen, I used to be immortal. I could not die. I could not feel pain. But I gave that up. She wasn't even listening. She was a galaxy away. All I know beyond any doubt is that I want a divorce. I do. That is what I want. You have destroyed us. You have destroyed Gulliver. Get him. Newton appeared at this point, wagging his tail, to try and calm the mood. Isabel ignored Newton and started to walk away from me. I should have let her go, but, bizarrely, I couldn't. I held on to her wrist. Stay, I said, and then it happened. Her arm swung at me with ferocious force, her clenched hand and asteroid speeding towards the planet of my face. Not a slap or a scratch this time, but a smack. Was this where love ended? With an injury on top of an injury? I'm leaving the house now, and when I come back I want you gone, you understand? Gone. I want you out of here and out of our lives. It's over. Everything is all over. I thought you'd changed. I honestly thought you'd become someone else. And I let you in again. What, a fucking idiot. I kept my hand over my face. It still hurt. I heard her footsteps head away from me. The door opened. The door closed. I was alone again with Newton. I've really done it now, I said. He seemed to agree, but I couldn't understand him anymore. I might as well have been any human trying to understand any dog. But he seemed something other than sad as he barked, in the direction of the living room and the road beyond. It seemed less like condolence, and more like warning. I went to look out of the living room window. There was nothing to be seen. So I stroked Newton one more time, offered a pointless apology, and left the house. Part 3. The wounded deer leaps the heist. It belongs to the perfection of everything human that man can only attain his desire by passing through its opposite. Søren Kierkegaard, Fear and Trembling, An Encounter with Winston Churchill. I walked to the nearest shop, a brightly lit and unsympathetic place called Tesco Metro. I bought myself a bottle of Australian wine. I walked along a cycle path and drank it, singing God Only Knows. It was quiet. I sat down by a tree and finished the bottle. I went and bought another. I sat down on a park bench next to a man with a large beard. It was the man I had seen before. On my first day, the one who had called me Jesus. He was wearing the same long, dirty raincoat, and he had the same scent. This time I found it fascinating. I sat there for a while, just working at all the different aromas. Alcohol, sweat, tobacco, urine, infection. It was a uniquely human smell and rather wonderful in its own sad way. I don't know why more people don't do this, I said, striking up a conversation. Do what? Get drunk, sit on a park bench. It seems like a good way to solve problems. Are you taking the piss, fella? No, I like it. And you obviously like it, or you wouldn't be doing it. Of course, this was a little bit disingenuous of me. Humans were always doing things they didn't like doing. In fact, to my best estimate, at any one time only 0.3% of humans were actively doing something they liked doing, and even when they did so, they felt an intense amount of guilt about it and were fervently promising themselves they'd be back doing something horrendously unpleasant very shortly. A blue plastic bag floated by on the wind. The bearded man rolled a cigarette. He had shaky fingers. Nerve damage ain't no choice in love and life, he said. No, that's true. Even when you think there are choices, there aren't really. But I thought humans still subscribed to the illusion of free will, not me, Chief. And then he started singing in a mumbled baritone of very low frequency. Ain't no sunshine when she's gone. What's your name? I'm Andrew, I said. Sort of, what's bothering you? You got beat up. Your face looks like shit. Yeah, in lots of ways. I had someone love me, and it was the most precious thing that I've ever loved. It gave me a family. It made me feel like I belonged. And I broke it. He lit the cigarette, which flopped out of his face like a numb antenna. 10 years, me and my wife were married, he said. Then I lost my job, and she left me, the same week. As when I turned to drink, and my legs started to turn on me. He lifted up his trousers. His left leg was swollen and purple and violet. I could see he expected me to be disgusted. Deep vein thrombosis. F in agony is F in fucking agony. And he's going to bloody kill me one of these days. He passed me the cigarette. I inhaled. I knew I didn't like it. But I still inhaled. What's your name? I asked him. He laughed. Winston Bloody Churchill. Oh, like the wartime prime minister. I watched him close his eyes and suck on his cigarette. Why do people smoke? No idea. Ask me something else. Okay, then. How do you cope with loving someone who hates you? Someone who doesn't want to see you again, God knows. He winced. He was in agony. I had noticed his pain on the first day, but now, I wanted to do something about it. I had drunk enough to believe I could, or at least to forget I couldn't. He was about to roll his trousers down, but seeing the pain he was in, I told him to wait a moment. I placed my hand on the leg. What are you doing? Don't worry. It's a very simple procedure of biosect transference involving reverse apoptosis working at the molecular level to restore and recreate dead and diseased cells. To you, it will look like magic, but it isn't. My hand stayed there and nothing happened and nothing kept on happening. It looked very far from magic. Who are you? I'm an alien. I'm considered useless failure in 2 galaxies. Well, could you please take your damn hand off my leg? I took my hand away. Sorry. Really? I thought I still had the ability to heal you. I know you, you said. What? I've seen you before. Yes, I know. I passed you on my first day in Cambridge. You may remember I was naked. He leant back, squinted, angled his head. Nah, wasn't there. I saw you today. I don't think you did. I'm pretty sure I would have recognized you. Nah, definitely today. I'm good with faces. See, was I with someone? A young woman? Red hair, you considered? Nah, it was just you. Where was I? You were on, let me think. It had been on New Market Road. New Market Road. I knew the name of the street because it was where I really lived, but I hadn't ever been on the street myself, not today. Not ever. Of course, it was very likely that Andrew Martin, the original Andrew Martin, had been down there many times. Yes, that must have been it. He was getting mixed up. I think you might be confused. He shook his head. It was you, all right? This morning. Maybe midday. No word of a lie, and with that the man stood up and hobbled slowly away from me, leaving a trail of smoke and spilled alcohol. A cloud passed across the sun. I looked up to the sky. I had a thought as dark as the shade. I stood up. I took the phone out of my pocket and called Ari. Eventually someone picked up. It was a woman. She was breathing heavily, sniffing up snot, struggling to turn noise into coherent words. Hello, this is Andrew. I wondered if Ari was there. And then the words came in morbid succession. He's dead. He's dead. He's dead. The replacement. I ran. I left the wine and I ran as fast as I could across the park, along streets, over main roads, hardly thinking about traffic. It hurt, this running. It hurt my knees, my hips, my heart and my lungs. All those components, reminding me they would one day fail. It also, somehow aggravated the various facial aches and pains I was suffering. But mostly it was my mind that was in turmoil. This was my fault. They had nothing to do with the ream and hypothesis and everything to do with the fact that I had told Ari the truth about where I was from. He hadn't believed me, but that hadn't been the point. I had been able to tell him without getting an agonizing, violent, tainted warning. They had disconnected me, but they must still have been watching and listening, which meant they could probably hear me now. Don't do it. Don't hurt Isabel or Gulliver. They don't know anything. I reached the house that, up until this morning, I had been living in with the people I had grown to love. I crunched my way up the gravel driveway. The car wasn't there. I looked through the living room window, but there was no sign of anyone. I had no key with me, so I rang the doorbell. I stood and waited, wondering what I could do. After a while, the door opened, and I still couldn't see anyone. Whoever had opened the door clearly didn't want to be seen. I stepped into the house. I walked past the kitchen. Newton was asleep in his basket. I went over to him, shook him gently. Newton. Newton. But he stayed asleep, breathing deeply, mysteriously unwakeable. I'm in here, said a voice, coming from the living room. So I followed it, that familiar voice, until I was there looking at a man sitting on the purple sofa with one leg crossed over the other. He was instantly familiar to me. Indeed, he could not have been more so, and yet at the same time the sight of him was terrifying. For it was myself I was looking at. His clothes were different. Jeans, instead of cords, a t-shirt, instead of shirts, trainers, in place of shoes. But it was definitely the form of Andrew Martin. The mid-brown hair, naturally parted. The tired eyes, and the same face except for the absence of bruises. Snap, he said, smiling. That is what they say here, isn't it? You know, when they're playing card games. Snap. We are identical twins. Who are you? He frowned, as if I'd asked such a basic question it shouldn't have been asked. I'm your replacement. My replacement. That is what I said. I'm here to do what you are unable to do. My heart was racing. What do you mean? To destroy information? Fear and anger were sometimes the same thing. You killed Ari. Yes? Why? He didn't know the Riemann hypothesis had been proved. No, I know. I have been given broader instructions than you. I have been told to destroy anyone you have told about your, he considered the right word, origins. So they've been listening to me. They said I was disconnected. He pointed at my left hand where the technology still evidently lived. They took your powers away, but they didn't take theirs. They listened sometimes. They check. I stared at it. At my hand it looked suddenly like an enemy. How long have you been here? On Earth, I mean, not long. Everyone broke into this house a few nights ago. They accessed Isabel's computer. That was me. So why the delay? Why didn't you finish the job that night you were here? I did not want to hurt you. No Vonadorian has killed another Vonadorian, not directly. When I'm not really a Vonadorian, I am a human. The paradox is that I'm light years from home, and yet this feels like my home. That is a strange thing to feel. So, what have you been doing? Where have you been living? He hesitated, swallowed hard. I have been living with a female human, a woman, yes. Where? Outside Cambridge, a village. She doesn't know my name, she thinks I am called Jonathan Roper. I convinced her we were married. I laughed. The laugh seemed to surprise him. Why are you laughing? I don't know. I have gained a sense of humor. That is one thing that happened when I lost the gifts. I am going to kill them. Do you know that? No. Actually, I don't, I told the hosts. There is no point. That's about the last thing I said to them. They seem to understand me. I have been told to, and that is what I will do. But don't you think it's pointless, that there's no real reason to do it? He sighed and shook his head. No, I do not think that, he said, in a voice which was mine, but deeper somehow and flatter. I do not see a separation. I have lived with a human for only a few days, but I have seen the violence and hypocrisy that runs through this species. Yes, but there is good in them, a lot of good. No, I don't see it. They can sit and watch dead human bodies on TV screens and feel nothing at all. That's how I saw it at first, but they can drive a car 30 miles every day and feel good about themselves for recycling a couple of empty jam jars. They can talk about peace being a good thing, yet glorify war. They can despise the man who kills his wife in rage, but worship the indifferent soldier who drops a bomb killing 100 children. Yes, there is a bad logic here. I agree with you, yet I truly believe. He wasn't listening. He stood up now, stared at me with determined eyes as he paced the room and delivered his speech. They believe God is always on their side, even if their side is at odds with the rest of their species. They have no way of coming to terms with what are biologically the two most important events that happen to them: procreation and death. They pretend to know that money can't buy them happiness, yet they would choose money every time. They celebrate mediocrity at every available opportunity and love to see others' misfortune. They have lived on this planet for over 100,000 generations, and yet they still have no idea about who they really are or how they should really live. In fact, they know less now than they once did. You're right. But don't you think there is something beautiful in these contradictions? Something mysterious? No, I do not. What I think is that their violent will has helped them dominate the world and civilize it, but now there is nowhere left for them to go, and so the human world has turned in on itself. It is a monster that feasts on its own hands, and still they do not see the monster, or, if they do not see that they are inside it, molecules within the beast. I looked at the bookshelves. Have you read human poetry? Humans understand these failings. He still wasn't listening. They have lost themselves but not their ambitions. Do not think that they would not leave this place if they had the chance. They're beginning to realize life is out there, that we, or beings like us, are out there, and they won't just stop at that. They will want to explore, and as their mathematical understanding expands, then they will eventually be able to do so. They will find us eventually. And when they do, they will not want to be friends, even if they think, as they always do, that their own ends are perfectly benevolent. They will find a reason to destroy or subjugate other life forms. A girl in a school uniform walked past the house. Gulliver would be coming home. But there is no connection between killing these people and stopping progress. I promise you, no connection. He stopped pacing the room and came over to me, leant into my face. Connections, I will tell you about connections. An amateur German physicist works in a patent office in Bern in Switzerland. He comes up with a theory that half a century later will lead to whole Japanese cities being destroyed along with much of their population, husbands, wives, sons, daughters. He does not want that connection to form, but that does not stop it forming. You're talking about something very different. No, I am not. This is a planet where a daydream can end in death and where mathematicians can cause an apocalypse. That is my view of the humans. Is it any different from yours? Humans learn the errors of their ways, though, I said. And they care more for each other than you think. No, I know they care for each other when the other in question is like them or lives under their roof. But any difference is a step further away from their empathy. They find it preposterously easy to fall out among themselves, and what they would do to us, if they could. Of course I had already imagined this and was scared of the answer. I was weakening. I felt tired and confused, but we were sent here to kill them. What makes us any better? We act as a result of logic, of rational thinking. We are here to preserve, even to preserve the humans. Think about it. This is a very dangerous thing for them. The boy must be killed, even if the woman can be saved. The boy knows. You told us yourself. You are making a little mistake. What is my mistake? You cannot kill a mother's son without killing the mother. You are speaking in riddles. You have become like them. I looked at the clock. It was 4:30. Gulliver would return home at any moment. I tried to think what to do. Maybe this other me, this Jonathan, was right. Well, there wasn't really a maybe. He was right. The humans could not handle progress very well, and they were not good at understanding their place in the world. They were, ultimately, a great danger to themselves and others. So I nodded, and I walked over and sat on that purple sofa. I felt sober now and fully conscious of my pain. You are right, I said, you are right, and I want to help you. A game, I know you are right. I told him for the 17th time, looking straight into his eyes. But I have been weak, I admit it to you now. I was and remain unable to harm any more humans, especially those ones I have lived with. But what you have said to me has reminded me of my original purpose. I am not able to fulfill that purpose and no longer have the gifts to do so, but equally I realize it has to be fulfilled, and so in a way I am thankful you are here. I have been stupid, I have tried. And I have failed. Jonathan sat back on the sofa and studied me. He stared at my bruises and sniffed the air between us. You have been drinking alcohol. Yes, I have been corrupted. It is very easy, I find, when you live like a human to develop some of their bad habits. I have drunk alcohol. I have had sex. I have smoked cigarettes. I have eaten peanut butter sandwiches and listened to their simple music. I have felt many of the crude pleasures that they can feel, as well as physical and emotional pain, but still, despite my corruption, there remains enough of me left, enough of my clear rational self to know what has to be done. He watched me. He believed me because every word I was speaking was the truth. I am comforted to hear this. I didn't waste a moment. Now listen to me. Gulliver will return home soon. He won't be on a car or a bike. He'll be walking. He likes to walk. We will hear his feet on the gravel, and then we will hear his key in the door. Normally he heads straight into the kitchen to get himself a drink or a bowl of cereal. He eats around 3 bowls of cereal a day. Anyway, that is irrelevant. What is relevant is that he will most likely enter the kitchen first. Jonathan was paying close attention to everything I was telling him. It felt strange, terribly giving him this information, but I really couldn't think of any other way. You want to act fast, I said, as his mother will be home soon. Also, there's a chance he may be surprised to see you. You see, his mother has thrown me out of the house because I was unfaithful to her. Or rather, the faith I had wasn't the right kind. In the absence of mind-reading technology, humans believe monogamy is possible. Another factor to consider is that Gulliver has quite independently attempted to take his own life before, so I suggest that however you choose to kill him, it would be a good idea to make it look like suicide. Maybe after his heart has stopped you could slice one of his wrists, cutting through the veins. That way less suspicion will be aroused. Then nodded, then looked around the room, at the television, the history books, the armchair, the framed art prints on the wall, the telephone in its cradle. It will be a good idea to have the television on, I told him, even if you are not in this room, because I always watch the news and leave it on. He switched on the television. We sat and watched footage of war in the Middle East without saying a word, and then he heard something that I couldn't, his senses being so much sharper. Footsteps, he said, on the gravel. He's here, I said. Go to the kitchen, I'll hide. 90.2 megahertz. I waited in the sitting room. The door was closed. There would be no reason for Gulliver to enter here. Unlike the living room, he hardly ever came into this room. I don't think I'd ever heard him do so, so I stayed there, still and quiet, as the front door opened, then closed. He was unmoving in the hallway, no footsteps. Hello? Then a response, my voice, but not my voice, coming from the kitchen. Hello, Gulliver. What are you doing here? Mom said you'd gone. She phoned me, said you'd had an argument. I heard him, me, Andrew Jonathan, respond in measured words. That is right, we did, we had an argument. Don't worry, it wasn't too serious. Oh yeah, said it pretty serious from Mom's side of things. Gulliver paused. Whose are those clothes you're wearing? Oh, these. They're just old ones I didn't know I had. I've never seen them before. And your face, it's totally healed. You look completely better. Well, there you go. Right, anyway, I might go upstairs. I'll get some food later. No, you will stay right here. The mind patterning was beginning, his words were. Shepard's ushering away conscious thought. You will stay here and you will take a knife, a sharp knife, the sharpest there is in this room. It was about to happen, I could feel it, so I did what I had planned to do. I went over to the bookcase and picked up the clockwork radio, turned the power dial to a full 360-degree rotation and pressed the button with the little green circle on. The small display became illuminated, 90.2 MHz. Your music blared out at almost full volume as I carried the radio back along the hallway. Unless I was very much mistaken, it was WC. You will now press that knife into your wrist and press it hard enough to cut through every vein. What's that noise? Gulliver asked, his head clearing. I still couldn't see him. I still wasn't quite at the kitchen doorway. Just do it, end your life, Gulliver. I entered the kitchen and saw my doppelganger facing away from me as he pressed his hand onto Gulliver's head. The knife fell to the floor. It was like looking at a strange kind of human baptism. I knew that what he was doing was right and logical from his perspective, but perspective was a funny thing.